Welcome. We are excited to have you join us today. We're here to offer a webinar as a partnership with Heartwise Learning and CUNY's Initiative on Immigration and Education to provide content related to how educators can create safe and inclusive schools for immigrant students from coast to coast. We know that many communities and immigrants are across the country are in crisis right now with the escalation of aggressive force by ICE and the use of dangerous tactics against both students and educators on school campuses. And we hope that today's session can provide you with relevant information to help understand the current context, as well as advocacy strategies that you can do at every level to create safe and welcoming schools for our immigrant students. We want to combat feelings of overwhelm and helplessness with feelings of community, solidarity, and agency. So, first, I'd like to introduce myself and our team. My name is Christina Lash. I'm a senior consultant with Heartwise Learning. I'm a former educator, a researcher, and facilitator, and I've been working to support equitable school transformation efforts for the past 14 years. I'm here with my colleague, Kendra Fair, our founder and principal at Heartwise Learning. She will be facilitating our group discussion immediately following the session. So, a little bit about Heartwise. Heartwise Learning is a mission-driven organization grounded in supporting students and communities by building equitable systems and practices. We're a team of researchers, educators, social service workers, and parents, and we partner with schools, organizations, and leaders who are deeply committed to helping student learning, well-being, and connectedness. The challenge we hear most often from educators isn't a lack of values, effort, or commitment to doing this work. What makes this work so hard are things like fragmented systems, unclear roles, and competing demands. So that's why we believe so strongly that change doesn't fail because people don't care. It fails when system structures and relationships don't support us. So, how we show up in the work is we work alongside leaders and teams in schools, districts, and community organizations to apply research, wise practices, and innovation in their day to day work. This might include providing thought partnership, supporting districts in implementing a new initiative like newcomer programs, or offering trainings for site level staff on strategies to support student well being. Across all of our work, we focus on making sure that we create that what we create is concrete, that it's usable, and that it's genuinely helpful in the day-to-day work of educators and other adults serving students and families. And I will pass it over to Tammy and Carmina to introduce themselves.
Hello and welcome. My name is Tammy Alsace, and I am the interim co-PI for the CUNY-Initiative on Immigration and Education, which we pronounce CUNY-I. And I'm actually located in Buffalo, New York, where I've been a lifelong educator, school administrator, and currently working with CUNY-I after my retirement. And my colleague Carmina is here with me today.
Thank you, Tammy. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Carmina. I'm an associate investigator at CUNY-I, and I've been working as a professor for the programs of bilingual education and TESOL at CUNY for over 12 years now. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
I want to tell you a little bit about CUNY-I. The City University Initiative on Immigration and Education is in year 7 of an originally 5-year project. It's the brainchild of principal investigator Dr. Tatiana Klein and is generously funded by the New York State Education Department. We work with the collaboration and support of the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages and Associate Commissioner Elisa Alvarez. At CUNY-I, we believe that communities and schools are shaped and strengthened by the migration of people and ideas across the globe. Through this project, educators, researchers, families, and local leaders work together to learn about, from, and with immigrant communities, act in ways that center our shared humanity regardless of legal status, and advocate for equitable policies and opportunities. As a result of this work, we've developed multimodal and multilingual resources that center the strengths of mixed status immigrant communities that include undocumented, refugee, and asylum seeking members. At CUNY-I, we operate on 10 grounding principles. As I read them to you, just think about which resonate with you the most. Black immigrant lives matter. No one is illegal on stolen land. We are not all immigrants. The immigrant experience exists beyond the Latinx narrative. Immigrants and students labeled as English language learners are not interchangeable. The immigration experience is complicated. Migration can be traumatic. Xenophobia is systemic. Teaching through translanguaging is central. And we aim to move beyond allyship to work as accomplices. Think about which of those resonate with you. Carmina?
Thank you. We would like to take a moment to acknowledge the lives recently lost in Minnesota, as well as the many lives lost in detention facilities and under brutal enforcement that we don't hear about as widely. We stand in solidarity with Minnesota, and we stand in solidarity with all the other states in the wake of this repressive climate. We also want to acknowledge educators and communities coming together to support each other, and it is in this spirit we share our thoughts with you today, hoping to enrich the dialogue that moves us forward as we think of ways to best support our communities. Creating spaces of belonging and supporting our immigrant students has long been part of our agenda. It was relevant before this current climate, and it will continue to be relevant beyond this time. For as much progress that has been made, there is yet a lot more to do. This is why we seek sustainable and systemic approaches to support our immigrant communities. We must address the current moment in crisis and also continue to think about the long-term policies and strategies that take into account the complex pedagogical and political ecosystem of our work. In this context, these are the goals for our session. By the end of the session, you will hopefully understand what state policies exist to support safe and inclusive schools for our students and what is still needed for both students and educators. Know what educators and leaders can do at the local level to advocate for policies to support safe and protective spaces for immigrant students and their families. And finally, gain new strategies and resources to create spaces of safety and belonging for immigrant students at the school and classroom level. Our agenda today is the following. Who are immigrant students? The current policy context for immigrant students nationally and in California and New York. What educators can do now to advocate for their immigrant students. 2 core practices to create safety and inclusion. And then we will invite you to join a discussion group after the webinar. There will be a link posted at the end of this to join the Zoom group. So we want to begin by framing who our students are. In this map, we just want to highlight the clusters, as you can see, of populations in New York, the East Coast, and then the West Coast, California, and then the South, Florida. As you can see, that's the highest number of public students that are coming from immigrant households. That's higher than 65%. The next slide, please. And then here, as you see these 2 pie charts, we want to emphasize that we shouldn't conflate these two. Not all else are recent immigrants, and not all English language learners are recent immigrants. So as you see in the pie, 26% are not else of recent immigrants, and then of all English learners, 15% only are recent immigrants. And by this, we mean students that have been in the US for 3 years or less. And we want to emphasize this because this nuance is important to develop effective strategies and programs for our students. Next slide, please. Here we see in New York, we have 1.5 million roughly children in immigrant families, whereas in California, we have 3.5 million. And so even though California's population is almost twice the size, the percentage both in New York and California is roughly the same. In New York, 23%, and in California, 27%. Out of these, the 2 languages, the 2 top languages spoken are Spanish and Chinese, and then the rest are ranked in order of their numbers. I'll hand it over to Tammy to talk about the policy backdrop. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about the policy backdrop. And while we feel an urgency to respond to the current moment, it's the policies at the federal and state level that can work to provide some stability and equity in the long term. For educators and leaders to be able to do their work, they need an understanding of the policy context and how policy can support the work they do in district schools and classrooms. We're going to present some of the federal policy landscape, which especially over the past year has been in a state of flux. We'll then take a bit more close look at the two states in which our respective organizations operate, Heartwise Learning in California and CUNY-I in New York. We know that due to the rapidly changing federal policies, our students are not necessarily safe across the country. Even their right to attend school is being challenged in some places. In New York and California, two states with some of the highest populations of immigrant origin students, some policy measures are in process or have already been taken to protect immigrant students. However, we're still seeing gaps. We chose these three policy areas, educator preparation, safe and protective schools, and language access, and how they are enacted or not in the federal level and in New York and California, which, as you saw, are two of the states, one on each coast, with long histories of welcoming and supporting immigrants from around the world. We visualize these policies as being interdependent and embedded one within the other. Without adequate educator preparation, we can't create safe, protective schools and classrooms environments. We also know that we can't create these environments without providing the necessary linguistic access and support, not only translation and interpretation services, but beyond that, multilingual instruction, which also requires educator preparation and development. We examine the changes at the federal level that have resulted in states scrambling to respond. And then we compare California and New York and the gaps in policy through advocacy and instructional practices. At the federal level, we have landmark legislation that protects the rights of all students to attend public school, no matter their parents or their parents' citizenship or immigration status. For over 40 years, Plyler v. Doe has been the law that ensures that states cannot deny our immigrant children a free public education. And while there has not yet been a challenge to Plyler at the federal level, advocates fear that there may be in the future, and it's now being challenged in several individual states. And as you can see on this map here, Plyler has been challenged in several states. Those are the dark blue. In the light blue, the challenges have failed. Tennessee has paused their action for now. And there are a couple of states that have already implemented legislation to protect students should Plyler be overturned. That's Illinois and Massachusetts. And if we click, we'll see that New York is in a light orange because New York has just finally issued a couple of bills to one in the Assembly and one in the Senate, which will protect students should Plyler be overturned. California Constitution guarantees a free public education to all children, and advocates there believe that if Plyler is overturned, California law would still require that all children be educated in public schools. We'll go on to the next. So there are many federal policy changes that have been rapidly changing, and with so much going on politically and the barrage of issues around immigrants and immigrations in the news, we sometimes find it hard to know what to focus on for advocacy and action. So we chose to focus on the three policy areas I mentioned earlier. For example, school safety has been threatened by the rescission of the Department of Homeland Security policy on schools as safe and protected spaces and heightened ICE enforcement that is entering schools. Language access has been threatened by the executive order declaring English the official language of this country and the rescission of the requirements for government agencies to provide information in languages other than English. Educator supports have been whittled away by the dismantling of the Department of Education, and in particular, the Office of English Language Acquisition. the withholding of Title III funds, along with the rescission of the Dear Colleague letter that outlines the responsibilities of districts with regard to services and supports for multilingual learners. Now, the rescission of this, of the Dear Colleague letter does not change the law. We still have the same responsibilities. But all of these and other anti-immigrant policies and rhetoric have left us all of us educators working to support students and families, feeling confused and helpless. The policy changes have several implications, which we'll explore in a moment. Because of these policy changes, there's increased responsibilities and challenges faced by state education agencies, local education agencies, and schools. Without additional capacity, they've been tasked with developing their own ICE response and safety protocols, navigating massive legal and operational complexity, facing fear and uncertainty, which are affecting students, families, impacting attendance and their well-being, and of course, their learning. There are fewer resources available because of all this for multilingual programs, staffing, and supports. So it's important, given all the turmoil, to focus our efforts on what we can do, the things we can control in our communities and classrooms, and how does the federal policy and anti-immigrant climate impact students in our states and localities. Some of the anti-immigrant climate impact on students, according to a study by UCLA, show that 77.6% of principals surveyed report that they've created a school plan to respond to visits from federal agents. Half of principals reported that they have created a plan to address student needs if parents or guardians experience deportation. And almost half of principals reported that they have created professional development for staff on how to support students from immigrant families, because students are facing increased anxiety, absenteeism, and heightened bullying. How does this data resonate with things you're seeing at your school? You can put a response in the chat. Or you can think about it. I don't see the chat moving. Yes, folks are seeing increased fear, anxiety. And absenteeism. ICE near campuses. Okay, we're going to go on because we have a lot to cover today. We're going to start by just comparing educator requirements. And this is, again, you can respond in the chat as I talk. Think about, what do you think your state requires for educator preparation for supporting immigrant students? Be some anti-bias training. Not sure that they require anything. Well, that's a great segue into our first piece. In New York, there actually is no requirement to include topics related to immigration issues in educator preparation programs or in-service professional development. While there is ELL-focused PD required for New York educators, there's nothing specific to immigration or trauma-informed practices for working with immigrant origin students. And in California, every teacher who provides instruction to an EL student must have EL authorization or CLAD certification, which is culture, language, and academic development certificate. However, there's nothing, again, specific to immigrants except for newcomer teacher supports required by AB 714, a regulation that requires the California Department of Education to provide resources and guidance for best practices in working with newcomers, although it doesn't require educators to avail themselves of those resources. So really, in neither state are there immigrant-specific topics in pre-service or in-service teacher preparation. When it comes to safe, protective learning spaces, there's much complexity when we imagine what's needed to provide safe, protective spaces. While student safety may be the first thing that comes to mind, the safety of educators is also at stake, and there's a lot of fear and uncertainty among educators about what to do. Think about what is your state or district currently doing to ensure that immigrant students can attend school in a safe environment? And you can put that in the chat as I'm going over the requirements or the policies in New York and in California. In New York, there is guidance from the state education department and the state attorney general on safeguarding the rights of immigrant students, which was issued related to school registration, accessing records, law enforcement in schools, but there's nothing that is in state law yet. Carmina's going to talk a little bit about those proposed legislation. We also have a Dignity for All Students Act that is against bullying and has been in place for several years. While in California, um, Education Code 234.7 prohibits public schools from collecting information or regarding the immigration status of students or family members. So there is a protection in place, along with the Safe Haven Schools Act, that protects immigrant children by creating safe zones at schools and childcare facilities where immigration cannot enter without a judicial warrant. Now, California also has the Safe Places to Learn Act, which is akin to New York's Dignity for All Students Act, provides resources against bullying and student support and safety. And so California is a little ahead of us, but hopefully New York will catch up with regard to those laws and regulations. And lastly, when it comes to language access and supports, what is your state or district doing to ensure that immigrant students can develop and or leverage their multilingualism while also learning English? Well, in New York, we're fortunate to have Commissioner's Regulations Part 154 that have been in effect since 1981. And these regulations are based on an education law that outline the services and process for identifying students and programs, services, and supports. And it requires that districts provide bilingual education where there are 20 or more students at the same grade level that speak the same language. Bilingual education is the default program in New York, and parents must opt out. We also have a New York State language access law that requires state agencies to translate documents into the top languages spoken by New Yorkers, but it doesn't necessarily apply to schools. In California, Proposition 58 was passed in 2016, enabling bilingual education programs in public schools, and it effectively repealed the restrictive and English-only immersion mandates of Proposition 227 that really prohibited bilingual education for many years. The California English Learner Roadmap Policy includes opportunities to develop proficiency in multiple languages, and the Daimali a la Torre Bilingual Services Act, in collaboration with that, also opens the doors for more multilingual instruction in schools, and that act is akin to the language access law that requires translation of state documents and interpretation in state agencies. And so why did we need all of this background about policy? Carmina's going to talk about some of the implications, but in order to know how to support and advocate for our students, we need to know what their rights are and when those rights are in jeopardy. Carmina?
Thank you, Tammy, for this critical backdrop. So to start off, what's going well? What have we seen that may serve as a blueprint. We, on the one hand, see that more states are passing legislation to make schools safe zones. We see in that chat someone here had just shared that Illinois has passed the Safe Schools Act. So we see this as gaining momentum. School and district leaders are taking action to protect students. Training and protocols are happening at the staff level, security, even with families and communities. More training on trauma-informed practices to staff. We see that more and more. And explicit zero tolerance policies for anti-immigrant bullying and hate speech, such as the DASA Act in New York. We also see that students, families, and community organizations are practicing engaged citizenship. We have seen that happen in New York and California, and unfortunately in Minnesota recently, we have seen that on the ground, with examples across the board in these states where schools are having remote sessions for students that are unable to come to school. Families are bringing groceries for those families that can't leave home. People are going to support people in their medical appointments, to shield them, to be vigilant. So we see a lot of engaged citizenship at this level, and schools are leading the charge. We also see that most states do not outright outlaw instruction in multiple languages. Teachers can still use multilingual instructional supports, and many districts provide resources and guidance, best practices to instruct multilingual learners. So all that is going well. It's some progress. There's still much more to do. And in the same sort of hierarchy or order that Tammy was sharing along the sort of the nested categories, we have our different categories, safe and protective schools. What do we need from policymakers and state DOEs? Well, first we need to codify Plyler v. Doe into state law. And again, this is the example we shared with Illinois, Safe Schools Act, and other states that are following suit. We also want to ask you to tell your congressman to support the Protective Sensitive Location Act. And you can do this now. If you can follow the link that's in the chat, keep ICE out of schools. It'll take 2 minutes. It's basically just your name, your email. The letter is already drafted. You just have to hit submit. Send letters and call your state legislators to pass laws that prohibit ICE from entering schools. This is critical. And we also need to reemphasize policies prohibiting schools from requesting social security numbers and proof of citizenship, even though we know they're not supposed to. This keeps happening across the board. So we want to emphasize the importance of this. What do we need from district leaders on the same topic, safe and protective schools, but from the leaders? Clear messaging around the district supporting their immigrant community, especially now with the different protocols changing. This is key. Having clear protocols for what schools should do if ICE comes on campus. All principals should be trained, staff should be trained, security should be trained, and students should be trained as well. Students should know, have their red cards. Everybody in the neighboring community should know what to do. And support schools in offering mental health services for families impacted by separation and trauma. What do we need from school leaders? Examples of these include advisory councils that are inclusive of immigrant families, partnering with community-based organizations, particularly now, legal services are critical, but also food, housing insecurity, all these community-based efforts. Training families on different emergency child safety plans, such as family preparedness, what happens in case of separation, having these plans in place, notarized, or at least a tutor. And then again, knowing your rights and providing red cards or wallet cards for students and staff to distribute. Now, what do we need for educator preparation from policymakers and state DOEs? Again, some of you have shared briefly in the chat. I think it adds to this. Requirements for teacher preparations should include coursework on serving immigrant students, right? Not just English language learners, but immigrant students as a whole. And then from district leaders, we emphasize professional development in things like culturally responsive instruction, trauma-informed practices. Again, we see that it's happening more and more. It's still not enough. And translanguaging pedagogies, which we will talk about more in a minute. School leaders do need to provide the time, the sub days, so that teachers can attend PD outside their school if needed. What do we need for language access and multilingual supports? From policymakers, ensure certification pathways for bilingual and ESOL educators, and then from district leaders, ensure adopted curriculum keeps the needs of immigrants and English learners in mind. We were thinking about the recent curriculum mandates, for example, in New York with structured literacy, or the science of reading. No curricula is developed, but then students are not included in these designs, immigrant students or English language learners. We have the example of the math curriculum in Fresno that was a new curriculum that was developed with these students specifically in mind. It was very effective. It was culturally relevant. So there is some groundwork covered when people are designing or where states are designing curricula to include these students. We also want to talk about multilingual pathways that offer different models of bilingual ed, for example, newcomer programs and all the different iterations of one-way, two-way transitional bilingual programs. As to the needs from school leaders, we'd like to see specific language programs, again, dual language or other kinds of programs that work specifically with the cultural component of immigrant population, and multilingual communication systems such as texts, emails, etc. We also want to talk about empowering teachers to create multilingual learning environments, even in general ed classrooms. This is something that can support our immigrant students, even those that are not in transitional bilingual or ENL programs. If you can share with us in a minute or two, what is one action that you'd like to explore in the next 2 months to help immigrant students feel more safe and welcome? One action. Something you could do in the short term, in the next month or two. Okay, we see hybrid PD workshops in person and virtual. Love that. For parents, having conversations with the principal about handing out red cards. Yes, we have been doing this in New York as well. It has been something of quite a lot of interest for families having wallet cards. Valuable information. Thank you. You can keep thinking about it, sharing your thoughts. And in the meantime, we're going to move on.
Thank you, Carmina and Tammy, for providing that just so important policy background to help us understand the current context. We want to shift gears and think about how can we move from district school level advocacy strategies to thinking about advocacy in the classroom. So, advocacy for our immigrant students doesn't just mean pushing for policy changes in the legislature or at the district. It's something that we can do in the way we structure our schools and the way that we talk to our students and in the everyday practices and interactions that teachers have with their students to create spaces of safety and welcome for their immigrant students and all students. So we want to dive more deeply into what that can look like on the ground. We first want to bring back the framework that we've been using in terms of these nested areas of action for our immigrant students. And we're going to start with strategies around supporting language access and multilingual development, because we believe this is a foundational strategy upon which others can be built. When we provide ways for immigrant students to communicate their thoughts, their ideas, and their feelings using any language that they can access and without the pressure to solely produce in English, we create more psychologically safe learning environments for our students and allow them to be better able to connect with their peers and with teachers. So we're going to focus on two core practices and provide some specific strategies for each. The first core practice is to provide opportunities for translanguaging in the classroom to support language access, positive identity development, and engagement in learning activities. And the second core practice is talk and teach about migration to cultivate empathy, perspective taking, and civic empowerment. So we'll begin with our first core practice around creating opportunities for translanguaging. We know that many educators think that the focus for immigrant students should develop their English abilities as fast as they can, often using sink or swim English immersion approaches. But we know from research that providing opportunities for students to leverage their full linguistic repertoire supports comprehension, their communication skills, and their student engagement and belonging. We're going to take a quick quiz just to gauge the knowledge that's already in the room from folks that you may know about translanguaging. This is going to be an ungraded quiz, so please choose true or false to the following statements, and we'll give you just about a minute to go ahead and answer that. The first question you'll see is translanguaging is when teachers use one-to-one translation to help students understand content. The second is translanguaging allows students to access all of their linguistic resources to support learning. And the third is the goal of translanguaging is to help students become proficient in English. And responses are coming in. Interesting. We're seeing a lot of folks think it's true that translanguaging allows students to access all of their linguistic resources to support learning. And some interesting splits in terms of whether or not we think translanguaging is to help students become proficient in English. And it's the same as using one-to-one translation. So I'm going to go ahead and end our poll. Thank you for participating. And Carmina, can you go ahead and tell us what translanguaging is?
Sure. So I see we have a lot of educators, but there may be some of you that are not familiar with the concept, right? Translanguaging. So we want to begin by talking about what translanguaging is as a language practice. So it is a term used to describe how we use our full linguistic repertoire to make meaning and communicate. So what does this mean? If you look at the two images on the right, you'll see the first image has several buckets, right? Different colors. So in the past, we used to think that languages lived in those buckets separately. English in one bucket, like the blue bucket, maybe Mandarin in the red, Spanish in the green. After decades of research, we have found that languages don't live in their separate buckets, but they're rather a single integrated repertoire. And so what translanguaging is fluidly moving within that spectrum to make meaning and use those resources to communicate. This is critical when we work with multilingual populations because we understand that it's not a crutch, meaning that if a student or we use a word in another language, it doesn't mean that we lack that word in our own language or the other. It's just a way we communicate more effectively by drawing from our full linguistic repertoire. We use, or multilingual students and communities use features of multiple languages to communicate, and it'll look different in school, in a community, at home, with the family. But the premise is that we will go back and forth and draw from two or more languages to make meaning. And so it is not translating one on one. It's not only translating, it's actually drawing from these sort of deeper repertoire. And well, Christina, you'll talk more about it, but we basically just want to emphasize that it's not a deficit perspective, it's not a crutch. It empowers our students to really communicate, making meaning of the repertoire.
Thank you. So when we think about how do teachers then integrate translanguaging into their classroom, how do they integrate these pedagogies to support students in being able to translanguage? There are a few core characteristics of a translanguaging pedagogy. The first is, as Carmina mentioned, that this really does challenge deficit perspectives of multilingual speakers and non-English languages. It invites students to use their knowledge of all of their languages to be able to engage in learning activities. And in this way, it empowers them by allowing them to access any of the languages that they know to support their comprehension, to understand comprehension gaps, to increase their engagement in classroom activities and to support their deeper learning of academic content. Translanguaging pedagogy also gives students structured opportunities to use their full linguistic toolbox to make meaning of content, connect to students' prior knowledge, and to communicate their thoughts. So often teachers worry that they don't know how to do translanguaging because they maybe don't speak a language other than English, or they feel that this would be discouraged from their leadership. We want to support the idea that translanguaging pedagogy is really about what are you structuring for students to be able to do so that students can pull on their full linguistic repertoire to engage in classroom activities. Translanguaging pedagogy also supports students in developing their metalinguistic awareness, including making connections between their home language and English. So teachers can serve as bridge builders to help students make connections between two different languages while also modeling linguistic curiosity themselves and showing that they are also language learners. And then finally, translanguaging pedagogy supports students in expressing their cultural and linguistic knowledge and assets as they develop their multilingual identities. And we'll be providing specific strategies that kind of speak to these core characteristics. So the first strategy is to encourage students to use what they know in their home language to make connections to content and to apply it to their learning of English or the target language if you're in a bilingual setting. So it's again, how do we make content relevant for students? If, for example, you were doing a unit on nutrition, you could first ask your students to write down the names of food or edible plants or crops or other relevant terms that they know in any language that they can access, and then provide an opportunity for students to learn this vocabulary in English. And then beyond that, teachers could encourage students to do structured sentences that integrates this new vocabulary, or even provide opportunities for peers to use sentences in which they use this new vocabulary in English. So it's again, how do we bring in students' linguistic resources to make content relevant? The second strategy is to provide peers with conversation opportunities to formulate their ideas and to connect prior experiences using English and their home languages. And this is something that can be used in the general education classroom, but also in newcomer classrooms with students who are in the early stages of learning English. So this could be, for example, a structured pair share where you allow students to use any language they can access for initial thinking and sense making as they talk to their peers about content, which also helps teachers understand where the comprehension gaps are and allows them to self assess that too with their peers. Teachers could also organize students in triads where they group students by common languages, but with different levels of English proficiency so that students can support one another in both building their understanding of the content, speak using their home languages, and then accessing all of their linguistic resources to be able to engage in conversation. Our last strategy is to help provide opportunities for students to integrate art and self-expression to allow students to um, connect to content and practice their multilingual writing and their speaking skills, and also, again, developing that multilingual identity. This is something that could be done through art, poetry, videos, journals. The goal is to, again, allow students the opportunity to draw on all of their linguistic resources to express their thoughts and communicate. So, in a sample activity called a language journey, students are able to visualize their experience speaking, hearing, learning other languages, and being able to visualize that across the life course using any languages that they would like to express that journey. So just to give an example of what this looks like, this is from our book by our brave colleagues, Dr. Alison Dover and Fernando Rodriguez Valls. from the Explorers program that they developed for newcomer students. And you'll see in this language journey example, the teacher is modeling this, showing, again, vulnerability and reciprocity in creating a sense of safety. The teacher then uses thought bubbles and speaking bubbles to talk about his journey speaking multiple languages from his childhood to adulthood, including questions that were raised for him or feelings. And he integrates both Spanish and English in this activity. And for your own amusement, I included my own language journey example that we've used in trainings that we've done for educators in newcomer programs. This is my language journey that where I similarly included thoughts and feelings about my various languages over my life course using hilarious stick figure drawings that you can appreciate later. So we provide resources, CUNY-I, and Heartwise on integrating these translanguaging strategies. We hope that they can be useful to you and your teams, and we'll provide all of these in a resource folder in the follow-up email after the session. So very quickly in the chat, what's one strategy to incorporate translanguaging that you'd like to explore or take back to your teams? And this could even be a new idea, something that you're just learning about in this session. Language journeys, wonderful. The group discussions, great. Yeah, integrating multiple languages in these activities, great. Well, that's great. Amanda, thank you for that. Time to process in their own language. Yes, brainstorm in any language first. Wonderful. So we hope these strategies can be useful to you. And again, we provide numerous resources to support you in this work after the session. Do you want to move on to our second core practice, which is to talk and teach about migration to cultivate empathy and perspective taking and civic empowerment. So we know that students at this time are feeling a great sense of fear, a great sense of helplessness at times with everything happening with aggressive ICE tactics, et cetera, family separations. And we know that teachers can't avoid these conversations. Students are bringing them up in class. And so we want to provide some strategies for how to take advantage of these conversations and this moment as learning activities and learning moments for your students. So our first strategy is to use text as an entry point to talk about immigration and the immigrant experience. And the idea is to find ways to have these texts honor and normalize the immigration experience and to showcase immigrants through an asset-based lens. This not only helps students develop academically, but helps to cultivate that sense of empathy and perspective taking across difference. So this means reading and discussing books that celebrate immigrant stories, like Island Born by Junot Diaz, that includes a class project where a student has to write memories of her home country, and she interviews her family members and community to be able to capture those stories. So we want to understand that these conversations, even with text, can be very emotionally delicate for students. And we want teachers to make sure that they are first creating that foundation of safety and trust with their students before they navigate these more difficult conversations. We also want to remind teachers that we never want to ask students about their immigrant status and to only encourage students to share of themselves as much as they feel comfortable. Our second strategy is to create opportunities for immigrant students to share their own stories. And this is something that we encourage folks to go to our wonderful partners at Reimagining Migration for resources. Their activities on moving stories provide a way for all students to talk about a moving story in their life, whether it's moving houses or cities or countries. And it helps students build bridges with each other and again supports understanding of the migration experience. And it can be done at all grade levels and connecting to grade level standards, including ELA, social studies. It does not just have to be something that's done in the newcomer classroom. With this activity, students can also incorporate interviews with family members and community members to again bring in more of those, elevate those stories of migration for students. We want to also encourage folks to teach students about anti-immigrant stereotypes, exclusion, and bullying, and their historical roots. So this includes through texts and literature, but can also be through conversations around current events. So for example, The Proudest Blue is a picture book about a young girl watching her older sister's first experience wearing a hijab at school and being teased by her peers, but it's also a story of strength and pride. And we want to use these stories to, again, help students develop that perspective taking. The other significant piece of this is these stories about collective experiences of exclusion can also motivate civic action for creating more equal and just conditions. So books like Without Separation, Prejudice, Segregation, and the case of Roberto Alvarez is a wonderful example of how we teach students about collective action in the past to fight against anti-immigrant stereotypes. And then finally, we want to emphasize that teachers can't steer away from hard topics. We need to have real conversations with our students about real world problems, but in a way that empowers students as civic actors. So this means providing students with opportunities to learn about immigration and immigrant issues through current events, and to also develop activities, provide resources that develop students' critical thinking about these events, encourages them to dive deeper to understand issues of immigrant exclusion or inequality. And one thing that we've seen be so successful are things like project-based learning. Or problem-based learning, as it's also been called, where students are able to deeply investigate a problem in their social worlds, and then they're also able to identify and brainstorm solutions to these problems and even present some solutions to their school communities, their family members. And all of these ways are not only building students' knowledge, but again, building those civic competencies so they have that sense of agency to make their own communities better. We provide resources again for engaging in this kind of work with your classrooms, including a wonderful literature guide, or excuse me, an immigration literature guide provided by CUNY-I that has a wealth of texts and resources from early childhood through high school. To do this work, there is a series of wonderful professional modules supporting educators and providing concrete strategies and tools to have these conversations. Um, and we want to emphasize that it's young children can still have these conversations. And some of the resources that CUNY-I provides specifically speaks to how we do this even in elementary school with our kids in ways that, again, still build that safety and incorporate translanguaging so that students can make sense of content and express their thoughts and feelings and ideas. All right, and I'll turn it over to Tammy to wrap us up.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Carmina, for sharing all of your knowledge and with us. Today, we want to take this opportunity to thank you all for being with us this afternoon. We also want to thank CUNY-I's Daniela Alulema, our project manager, who's behind the scenes helping us with making all of this become a reality today and with all the other work that CUNY-I does. We also want to thank Maria Jimena Diaz, who's here behind the scenes helping us as well, and Heartwise's Marina Naumowska for supporting the event.